Welcome to our deep dive today into, well, you could call it the battle of ideas that shaped modern economies. Yeah, Keynes versus Hayek.
We've got a ton of research here, and it's a lot more interesting than you might think.
Trust me, this stuff impacts you directly, like your wallet,
Government policies.
even how we deal with like global crises, those big ones.
These two economists, they were decades apart, but they're still like the main characters in this story. It's wild.
So Keynes, he was all about the government stepping in, right? To stabilize things,
Yes.
especially when the economy's in the dumps.
Yeah, he'd say the government needs to be the strong hand,
Yeah.
especially during, downturns and recessions and all that.
Right, like a booster shot for a sluggish economy.
Exactly.
But then you have Hayek. He was like, whoa, hold on. He basically said the government getting involved is the problem.
Yeah, Hayek's view was more like, let the market do its thing. It'll self-correct eventually.
So control versus freedom, basically. And looking back, both sides have had their, moments of glory. And let's be honest, some pretty big flops.
Oh, for sure.
And you know where this really gets interesting? Government spending. I mean, we're talking about huge institutions here, like the IMF and the World Bank.
These were pretty much born from that Keynesian idea of the government needing to step in, stimulate the economy.
Right. And it went beyond just theory. The IMF, especially in the early days, they were all about lending money so governments could, spend their way out of trouble.
Yeah, but it's not always a smooth ride, right?
No, definitely not. Remember what happened with Greece not that long ago? Their debt, like, totally out of control. It makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Is there a point where that Keynesian boost, it turns into a massive debt hangover? Maybe Hayek had a point about the government meddling too much.
It's the million-dollar question, I think.
Yeah.
Nobody's always... Right. It's about finding that balance. Intervention versus letting the market run wild.
That's a tough one. And this leads us to another big debate. Economic cycles. Hayek believed all that meddling, like messing with interest rates, giving out easy credit,
Yeah, all that stuff.
that it just creates these artificial booms, which obviously lead to busts.
It's like building a house of cards.
And sooner or later, boom, the whole thing collapses, like with subprime mortgages, right?
Yeah, and the deregulation wave in the 80s and 90s,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
dot-com bubble bursting, all that. Like, Hayek was predicting it all along.
Right. And the dot-com bubble, that's like the perfect example of what Hayek was warning about. So much speculation, easy money flowing everywhere, nobody really watching what's going on. Then pop, trillions gone, just like that.
Exactly. It's like someone took a pin and just went, pop.
Wow. And all that, like, deregulation, the boom and bust, it kind of set the stage for 2008, didn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Which begs the question, did we learn anything from the dot-com crash? Because 2008 feels like, I don't know, part two? Same movie, but bigger explosions. And this is where the Keynes versus Hayek debate gets really intense, right? Do you bail out those giant companies, the ones that are quote-unquote too big to fail?
Right.
Or do you just let them crash and burn, like a real-world test of their theories?
Yeah, it becomes this huge ideological experiment. Do you go full Keynes, pump trillions into the system to stop a total meltdown?
Or do you listen to Hayek and let the market fix itself, even if it's brutal?
A tough call.
So which way did we go? Did we follow Keynes or Hayek?
It wasn't a clear win for either side. Governments, most of them, went for a mix. A little bit of both. It was like economic triage.
So massive bailouts to keep things from falling apart completely, but then also stricter regulations, to try to prevent the next crisis.
Right, a compromise, trying to find that middle ground.
But does that even work, or are we just postponing the inevitable, kicking the can down the road, like they say?
That's what a lot of people are arguing about.
Some say the bailouts, they were absolutely necessary, that we dodged a global economic apocalypse.
Right.
But then others, especially those Hayek fans, they say, wait a minute, what about moral hazard?
Yeah, that idea that if you know you're going to get bailed out, you'll take bigger risks.
Right.
Because someone else will foot the bill if things go bad.
So it's like a game of chicken, but with the entire global economy at stake.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But how do you even measure that risk? It seems impossible.
Well, that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
Because you're not just dealing with numbers and models.
Right.
You've got human behavior, political pressure, global events that are constantly changing.
It's like trying to predict the weather, but instead of rain or shine, it's economic booms and busts.
Yeah, pretty much.
So where does this leave us? Do we understand Keynes and Hayek any better now?
I think the big takeaway is both of these guys, they had some really insightful ideas.
Yeah.
But neither one had all the answers. They're theories, they're like tools. And like any tool, they can be used well or they can be misused.
I see. So it's not about choosing a side. It's about understanding their ideas, what works, what doesn't work, and applying them intelligently.
Exactly. And that's where it gets exciting.
Yeah.
Because we've got all these new problems to deal with, climate change, new technology. It's a whole different ballgame. And that debate, government control versus free markets, it's still raging.
So the game's changed, the players are different, but that fundamental tension, it's still there.
It's always going to be there.
Okay, so how do we apply all this to today's problems? Do we need a whole new playbook, or can we learn from the past?
That's what we'll be diving into next time.
I can't wait. Sounds like we've got all the puzzle pieces laid out. Now we need to figure out how they fit together in this new economic landscape. Stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started.
Okay, so let's dig deeper into those 2008 bailouts. Remember, this was like a real-world test of Keynes versus Hayek, when theory met, a real crisis.
Yeah, governments had to make some seriously tough choices back then. Trillions of dollars on the line. What did the research say about the arguments, for and against those bailouts?
Well, Keynesian side basically said, look, if we let the whole system collapse, it'll be a disaster.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Banks fail, businesses close, massive unemployment, a global recession that could spiral into something way worse.
So from that view, the bailouts were like, I don't know, a necessary evil.
Yeah, like a tourniquet to stop the economy from bleeding out.
Right, right. But then you have the Hayekian side. Those concerns about moral hazard, those are hard to ignore.
Oh, yeah.
If these institutions know they'll get bailed out, won't they just take bigger risks in the future? It's like, why not? Someone will always come to the rescue.
That's the core of the debate. It's not so simple.
Yeah.
It's not just bailouts bad, let them fail good. It's more nuanced.
Okay, so how do you find that balance? I mean, you need to avoid a meltdown, but you also don't want to create a system where reckless behavior is rewarded. How do you even approach that?
Well, one idea is to make sure any bailout comes with strings attached.
Okay.
Like requirements for restructuring, more transparency, maybe even limits on executive pay, things like that. It's about sending a signal, right?
Right.
A bailout isn't a free pass. It comes with responsibilities.
So you're not just throwing money at the problem. You're making sure there are safeguards in place, like making the patient take their medicine, so to speak.
Right. But some people argue, even with those safeguards, bailouts still distort the market.
Right, right.
Hayek believed that letting businesses fail was a natural, even healthy part of the economy, like clearing out the deadwood so new things can grow.
But applying that during a crisis, that's a tough call. I mean, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, what's an acceptable amount of economic damage? It's almost a moral question as much as an economic one. And this dilemma, it's only going to get more complicated. I mean, look at climate change. That's forcing us to rethink, well, everything, really.
Climate change, that's a perfect example of what economists call a negative externality.
Right, basically a cost that doesn't show up in the market price.
Right.
Like for decades, we've been polluting without really paying for it.
And now the bill is coming due. Extreme weather, rising sea levels, agriculture getting disrupted. It's all adding up.
It is.
So where do Keynes and Hayek fit into this? Can their ideas help us as we deal with this?
That's where things get interesting. Some people are saying climate change needs a big Keynesian response.
Like massive government investments.
Exactly. Green technologies, infrastructure, a shift to a low-carbon economy.
So kind of a Green New Deal approach, using government spending to kickstart a whole new sustainable economy.
Exactly. But there are also those who see a role for Hayekian principles here. They'd say we need market-based solutions, like carbon taxes, cap-and-trade systems.
So instead of the government directly controlling things, you create a market for pollution, make it more expensive to pollute, reward those who find cleaner ways to do business.
Right. It aligns with Hayek's belief in the power of markets to figure things out, to allocate resources efficiently.
It's crazy how these ideas, they were developed so long ago in a totally different world, and they're still relevant today.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's not just climate change. We've got technology changing everything, too. Automation, AI, the gig economy, it's all reshaping how we work. And it's creating a lot of anxiety about inequality, right?
And this is where the Keynes-Hayek debate takes another turn. Some say we need a stronger social safety net, like universal basic income, expanded health care, things like that, to help people cope with these changes, make sure everyone benefits from progress. That's very much in line with Keynes' focus on employment and social welfare.
So a safety net for the age of disruption, because the way we work might be changing forever.
Exactly. But then you have those who say, No, the best way to adapt is through flexibility, deregulation, a dynamic labor market.
More of a Hayekian approach.
Right. They'd say too much government intervention, even if it's well-intentioned, it can actually make things worse. It creates rigidity and stifles innovation.
So it comes down to how much do we try to control these forces and how much do we just let them play out, trusting that the market will find a new balance eventually.
That's the tension at the heart of this whole debate. And it's only going to get more intense as we move further into the 21st century.
It's like we're standing at a crossroads, lots of paths ahead of us, each with its own risks and rewards. So how do we choose? How do we make sense of it all?
That's what we'll explore in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look for clues from the past, weigh the arguments, try to find some wisdom to guide us as we face the future.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. We've really been exploring this Keynes and Hayek thing, haven't we? Government spending, those 2008 bailouts, even climate change and all the new technology, it all ties in somehow.
It does.
So can we bring it all together? Is there a way to, I don't know, bridge the gap between these two economic ideas? They seem pretty opposed to each other.
Yeah, it's easy to think of it as this battle, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
government versus markets, winner takes all. But I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Both Keynes and Hayek, they had important things to say. And their ideas, I think they can work together. More like complementing each other, not fighting.
So it's not about picking a side. It's more like recognizing that they each had a piece of the puzzle. But how do those pieces fit together? I mean, especially with all the crazy, complicated stuff we're facing today.
Well, let's go back to Keynes for a minute. He was really worried about the short term.
Right.
How to keep economies stable, especially during those downturns. He'd say you need government spending to boost demand, keep people employed, stop things from spiraling out of control. But, and this is important, he wasn't saying the government should run the entire economy.
Okay, so it's not about total government control. It's more like the government steps in when the market's not working right.
Yeah, like an economic shock absorber.
Right.
Keynes knew that markets were crucial for innovation, for efficiently using resources. He believed in a mixed economy, a balance.
That's where Hayek comes in, right?
Exactly.
He was all about free markets.
Yeah.
He believed in the power of individuals and businesses making their own decisions, driving progress without the government getting in the way. But didn't Hayek also admit that markets weren't perfect? That sometimes they messed up?
He did. He understood that markets need some rules, like property rights, a stable currency. He wasn't saying, let's just get rid of all the rules and have chaos. His main concern was that when governments meddle too much, especially with things like prices and interest rates, it distorts how markets are supposed to work. And then things can get even worse.
Okay, so it seems like the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Both the government and the market have a role to play. But how do you find that balance in real life? It's one thing to talk about it, but the world is messy, right?
It is. And there's no single right answer. It depends on the situation, the problems you're dealing with, how strong is the government, how developed is the market. It's always changing. But I do think we can learn a lot from both Keynes and Hayek.
Okay, let's wrap this up then. What are the big takeaways here, the things our listeners should remember?
Well, first, economics. It's not like physics or chemistry.
Right.
It's about people, about politics. There are so many unpredictable things that can happen. There's no magic formula for success.
So basically, don't be too confident. No one can predict the future perfectly.
Exactly. And that leads to the second thing. Be practical, not ideological. Both Keynes and Hayek had some great ideas, but neither one had all the answers.
Okay.
You have to be willing to adapt, use the right tools for the job. Whether those tools are Keynesian or Hayekian, it doesn't matter.
It's like being a mechanic. You need a whole toolbox, and you need to know which tool to use when.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need a wrench, sometimes a screwdriver, sometimes maybe you need a tool that hasn't even been invented yet.
Perfect analogy.
Oh.
And the last thing is think critically. Question assumptions, challenge the status quo, be open to different ideas.
Okay.
The world's a complicated place, and the solutions, well, they're rarely simple. We have to be informed, engaged citizens if we want to deal with all this complexity.
So no easy answers, be practical, think critically. Not bad advice, I'd say.
I'll take it. And one more thing, keep having these conversations. It's important. The future, it depends on us talking to each other, learning from each other, finding common ground.
That's a great point. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Keynes and Hayek.
My pleasure.
It's been quite a journey. I hope everyone listening has a better understanding of these two guys and how their ideas still matter today.
I hope so too.
No.
And remember, keep learning, keep questioning, keep the conversation going.
Until next time, folks.